table. Sit down. They're letting me sit down for once today.
So I'd like to first of all thank everybody for coming out to the RedState gathering this year. It's amazing to have so many people here. It's encouraging. Oftentimes we're out there and we're taking heat, and we appreciate that you guys are out there as well, having our backs. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we appreciate you very much. RedState wouldn't be around if it wasn't for the activists like you who come and basically let us say things that you guys are thinking. So with that, I as well am quite biased. I do not think that the NRSC is that great of an organization, but I'm going to do my best to be semi-objective, and more than likely we'll reach agreement between the three of us on many of these issues. But let me just set the let me just set the stage a little bit. Over the last couple of election cycles, we've seen an increasing intolerance from the NRSC towards conservative candidates, Tea Party candidates, social conservatives, anyone who is more conservative than your average 30-year incumbent in the Senate. They don't like us. And they feel that they can use any tactics they like to demean us and make sure that we don't get elected. And my perspective is that they do this only for the sake of their own power. They like to claim, thank you. They like to claim that they have two mandates: to gain us a Republican majority and to protect their incumbents. Unfortunately, they don't realize that those two mandates are often in conflict. When we have people who have been there for 30 years and haven't been back to their states, except for maybe 5 days a year, they don't understand that that incumbent isn't going to get us to a Senate majority. They don't understand that everything that we need to do only happens if we have the fresh blood and the willingness to do it. So with that, we're going to pass it over here and talk a little bit more about the destructive tactics that have been used, whether or not they're justifiable in any way, shape, or form, and whether or not there is actually any utility for the conservative movement in the NRSC post-2014. So let me go ahead and start out with Caleb. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, Caleb. Go ahead and pick up your mic so people can hear you. And first off, I want to ask you about how the NRSC treats candidates who are further to the right of the incumbents, and how they go about portraying them in the media and doing the left's dirty work for them.
Well, that's not a loaded question at all.
I admitted that I'm biased.
Do you agree that they're terrible? Yes, or I'm terrible?
So what I want to ask you actually is, beyond what we've seen in the 2014 cycle, previous to that we've seen other things. Do you feel like this escalation is driven by the Tea Party movement and the rise of it, or do you feel that this escalation is purely from the NRSC and the power and the protection of that power?
Well, first, I just want to answer your question with a question for the audience. Cochran, who remembers the Cochran race? How do you think that went for conservatives? How do you think the NRSC acted? I heard criminal.
Criminal.
I heard criminal. We're going to go with criminal. That's the correct answer. Yeah, no, I think it's been an escalation, definitely, in response to the rise of the conservative movement, because the Tea Party by nature are challengers. They're challenging the incumbents. That immediately puts the NRSC on the defensive, partly because that's their job, is to defend incumbents, but I think partly because there's a culture that has been fostered and has grown there that is against, even when it's an incumbent, that is against a person who is too conservative, because when you're inside the Beltway, those people are viewed as outsiders who are unwelcome and aren't going to do you know, what's necessary for the party apparatus, for the establishment, and for the bigwigs to still be accepted at the other Hollywood parties.
Okay, so now I'm going to pass this over to Eric, and it's going to be very challenging for him, but do you believe that the NRC is simply responding to the Tea Party and the rise of the conservative movement since 2008, or do you believe that they are inherently horrible at this and only want to protect their incumbents?
I think history
one or the other.
I think history shows that one of the losingest NRSC chairmen of all time, and you can look at the record if you don't believe me, one of the NRSC chairmen who lost the most races for the Republicans is now the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who was so successful at being NRSC chairman, he served twice, and both times it was an unmitigated disaster for the election of Republicans in the Senate. That's just a fact. Or if you look at 2012, the number of seats they thought they might be able to win that went down in flames, that's just a fact. The NRSC is run by individuals who aren't so much about getting Republicans elected as they are the preservation of power of those who are already there. They only want, at this point, their candidates elected. Now, I think this is very important to understand. The National Republican Senatorial Committee used to stay out of primaries, and several years ago decided that they would involve themselves in primaries because of the nature of the candidates they felt like were running. They felt like you had these amateur, unpolished candidates who were going to get defeated in the general elections, and there was some truth to that. There were some unpolished candidates who were going to get defeated in the general election. But what happened is the staff, not really the leadership in charge so much as the staff, decided that they needed to show that they were in charge. And if you did not kiss the staffers' rings, this, by the way, is why I'm not necessarily opposed to term limits on members of Congress, but strongly advocate term limits on staffers to Congress. They decided that they were in charge. So consider this. Tomorrow, Ken Buck is going to be here, who's running for Congress. Ken Buck ran for the Senate 4 years ago in 2010. The National Republican Senatorial Committee in the last 3 weeks of that race spent money beating the hell out of Ken Buck, and then did not have money to help Ken Buck in the general election after they'd beat him up, and he lost by 2 percentage points, winning independent voters by 20% in Colorado. He was the only Republican to win independent voters in Colorado in 2010. Or consider the Sharon Angle situation. Now, they say Jim DeMint and conservatives rallied to Sharon Angle. Actually, I supported Tarkadian. Jim DeMint sat out of it, and when Sharon Angle was the nominee, the NRSC wouldn't send her any money. Jim DeMint sent her more money than the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Once she was the nominee, they gave up on her, and she came close. The National Republican Senatorial Committee has decided that if they don't like the candidate, they will take their football and go home. And they are trying to show conservatives that we must bend to their will. The problem is they had a lobbyist the other day refer to the conservative Tea Party movement as Ebola. They did. Steve LaTourette, he referred to conservatives as Ebola. And Barney Keller, a friend of mine, the press spokesman for the Club for Growth, his only response was, well, then he should remember, there's no cure for that.
I'd say we're definitely causing a fever and bleeding some people out, so it may be an appropriate thing to call us Ebola at times, even if we may not like it. But I also want to say, you know, I'm going to come back to you, Eric, on this one. There are some things that only the NRSC can do, and I don't want to necessarily defend the tactics that the current NRSC has employed, but as an organization, I do want to note that there are some things that the other organizations, such as Senate Conservatives Fund, Heritage Action, Madison Project, can't legally do. And I'd like you to talk on that for just a moment and see if, you know, there is still life that we can put back in it.
I used to be a lawyer in a former lifetime, not only a lawyer, but an elections lawyer. I'm in the 11th of the 12 steps, I believe. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, like the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, can coordinate with candidates in a way outside groups can't. Because they are the official party sanctioned groups and leadership sanctioned groups, they can help with and aid candidates much more directly and financially than the Senate Conservatives Fund can, or Club for Growth, or Madison Project, or Freedom Works, or you name it. They can do that. The problem is that in playing in the primaries, they don't have as much money to do it in the general election. So we have to some degree rely on them in general elections. The problem is, as Ken Cuccinelli said this morning, take, for example, Tom Tillis in North Carolina. He's getting his butt kicked against a terrible candidate because he is a terrible candidate. The National Republican Senatorial Committee's greatest flaw is not that they play in primaries, honestly. I mean, that's a flaw. But their greatest flaw is that they find candidates who think and act like themselves. And that may play well in the Beltway with a bunch of media sources who rely on the NRSC and write hagiographic reports in various newspaper outlets in Washington. But, you know, voters can tell when a guy sucks. It's like Rick Perry's greatest advice to me ever is look at their boots. If they're not scuffed, don't trust them. We got a lot of these recruits who look like NRSC guys with a lot of shiny boots that have never been broken in.
Absolutely. So, Caleb, I want to go to you as a counterpoint. We do have groups out there like Senate Conservatives Fund, Madison Project, Heritage Action for America, and many others, Freedom Works, who are trying to counterweight and be a counterbalance to the NRSC. Of course, they are limited, as we just said, but what can, in your perspective, what should activists be doing in order to help those groups get further along the line in order to push back against the NRSC?
Well, I think the first step is to get the NRSC back in line rather than just try to create groups to counteract against them. I think part of the main problem that most of us have with them is the culture, not the activity. It's the culture, it's the way that they talk to and about, like calling conservatives Ebola. It's their representatives who go online on their Twitter accounts under the guise of opinions are my own, and they say awful things about the candidates. They know that's going to get reported in Politico, whether or not they have a disclaimer on their Twitter page. What they do is they go out and undermine people who may at some point be someone they have to defend. Mm-hmm. And that leaves candidates completely flat-footed. No money, no support, nothing in the general election. So when you go out and you undermine conservative candidates, who is it that you're really undermining?
Your own party.
So if the party base doesn't have any confidence in the apparatuses of the party to support the candidates that the party base chooses, then what kind of system do we have?
Broken one. So on that point, I do want to bring up one thing. We talk about reforming the NRSC from the inside, and we do have someone who is a conservative firebrand who's been in the workings of the NRSC. We have Senator Ted Cruz. And Eric, I'm going to come to you on this and ask, in your perspective, how should Senator Cruz leverage his position within the NRSC to make these reforms occur?
Oh, I've gone on record that he should leave it. I think that they try to use his name to woo people to give them money and then elect candidates who are diametrically opposed to the Cruz agenda. If you can't lead it and change it, I'm not sure you should be a part of the organization. Now that's for Senator Cruz to decide. Hopefully he can make some institutional changes at the NRSC. To his brave and good credit, he has been very vocal about his disagreements with the way they've done a number of things. And it's nice to have a fearless conservative in Washington willing to say those things.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to point out right now that I'm sure nobody in this room gives money to the NRSC, right? Not one red cent, if you remember that from a while back. But I do believe also that we do need to stop the money flow to them. And we need to encourage other activists to understand that the money that they give them is being used to attack conservatives, and not just conservative individuals, but an entire philosophy. An entire philosophy that was laid down at the foundation of our republic. And that's something that more conservative activists need to understand. When they get these phone calls asking them to give money to the NRSC, they need to realize what that money is going towards. And I'd also definitely encourage more people to give directly to candidates, because honestly, when you're giving directly to the candidate, nobody else can mess with them.
You know who's good at facilitating that? RedState.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You might have heard of that website.
And on that, we're about 18 minutes into our panel, so I want to do a couple different things here real quick. I want Caleb to go ahead and make any final statement that he has on the NRC, because I believe he has a quick couple notes that he jotted down that he'd like to.
These are my 4 questions, but I did want to add one thing. Part of the problem is the consultants in DC, and when you have groups like the Senate Conservative Fund that could give great advice to candidates, once they've endorsed them, they can't say, look, you're with the wrong guys here, you've got this consultancy that is basically flim-flamming you. We don't have people from industry, people that are out there, I don't want to plug anybody in particular, but that are out there producing quality materials and content and advice. And
you mean like your brother, Ben?
I'm not familiar. Is that big fat guy?
Wow, brotherly love right there.
Yes.
So, and then Eric, I'm going to give you a chance to give one closing statement on this as well, and then we are going to move on to a couple other things. I'm going to allow anyone in the audience who has a question to stand up. We don't have mics for you right now because we had to pull them for up here, so you'll have to speak loudly. And then we are going to do a special segment called 4 Questions with Ben Howe. And if you've ever watched the Red State Weekly Briefing on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, you'll know that these can be quite hilarious.
Sometimes Monday and sometimes Saturday.
Sometimes Monday, but we're trying to get it down on Sundays. So Eric, your closing?
Oh, yeah, let me just echo what Caleb just said about the consultant class. You know, I was a political consultant for a number of years. I ran state, local, and federal races, and as an aside, it's one of my greatest pet peeves about the modern political media, both on the right and on the left, is you've got a bunch of these political reporting kids in their 20s or 30s where history began, if not with Bush versus Gore, with Hope and Change in 2008, and they've never done jack in campaigns. They don't know how to write a poll, design a mail piece, or cut an ad, and yet they pretend to be prognosticators and experts on political campaigns without having done anything in their lives politically other than read a newspaper from last year or Newsweek when it was around. And so you get a bunch of crap reporting. And they get it all wrong. And part of the problem as well is these consultants on the right compare and contrast with Barack Obama, who put every one of his consultants on the campaign payroll. So they weren't making commissions off of him, and they weren't working for other people. They were full-time employees of Barack Obama for president. The Republicans, on the other hand, Mitt Romney in particular, paid millions of dollars in commissions and fees to an incestuous group of consultants outside of Washington, D.C., who bled him dry, making commissions on websites and software and crappy TV ads that persuaded no one to vote for Mitt Romney. Those people got rich and the rest of us got screwed, and the Republican consultants continue to do it. And now the National Republican Senatorial Committee maintains those people in the payroll. Some of the very same people who cause problems for the Republican Party are outside consultants for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and they all have a game plan that Barack Obama and Harry Reid have proven doesn't work anymore, and that is you save up till the bitter end. Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes, and run every TV ad and radio ad and mail piece you possibly can and sit back and collect the commissions, while meanwhile the Democrats 6 months ago defined your candidate as an idiot philandering fool who's incapable of doing anything in Washington, D.C. And you can't recover from that in the last 3 weeks of the campaign. Until the consultants give up their commissions and start defining the Democrats in May, the Republicans are going to keep having the same problems. But there's no money in it for those consultants, even at the NRSC.
And I want to go off of that for just a minute and challenge everybody. Next time you get an email from any Republican group, look down at the bottom of it and find out who it's actually coming from.
Oh, it's probably from the Mitt Romney campaign. They still sell the email list because the consultants are still getting commissions off of it.
So I definitely want everybody to remember that. So now we're going to do 4 questions with Caleb Howe here. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for a few questions if anybody has any. So, Caleb?
All right, so this is called 4 Questions. Now, I don't want to get too complicated here, but the way it works is that I'm going to ask 4 questions of Eric, and then he will answer them.
You set me up to be on stage with you, didn't
you? And then we will give him a score. The current high score holder is Rafi Williams from the RNC with 1.5?
2.5.
2.5 correct answers.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, so question number 1, Eric Erickson of RedState.com. As you know, or you may not know, the Red State Gathering takes place every year. Next year, It's going to be in Atlanta. In light of that fact, can you explain to me why you refuse to watch The Walking Dead? I mean, for God's sake, join the culture.
Ebola.
We'll accept that answer. We also would have taken because zombies are scary.
Ebola. I like lamp.
You keeping score?
Yes, that's a half point or a 3/4.
Okay, yeah, we'll give a half point. Question 2. I recently saw the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, and I thought it was a great movie and a family movie.
We had this argument last weekend.
Crowd, and Aaron thinks it is full of curse words and evil. So can you tell us in your own words, why do you even like Aaron? I just don't get it.
Because the Jackson Pollock line was awesome.
That was, all right. That's another half point. I was going to say he looks great in tight
This is
jeans.
so rigged. Half point my butt.
All right, 3/4 of a point.
All right.
3/4, all right. So you're
the
at
other
1
answer was
1/4.
He looks great in tight jeans. So. All right, question number 3. You said the NRSE likes to take their football and go home. Did you mean to say wiffle ball?
Yes.
Wiffle ball. I thought that was
That's a full
clearly
point.
a full point.
Yeah. So we're at 1 or 2 1/4. You actually have a chance to beat
Well, if
Rafi
I
at this
ask you
point.
to keep score, probably not. You're going to ask me what the score is. Probably you should keep that score.
I control your paycheck.
He does.
All right, question number 4. If you were at, theoretically speaking, a conference of conservatives and activists, all right, and you were on a stage, let's say, and you had some authority with which to speak, what would you tell that audience of activists and conservatives and Aaron?
Oh, so it'd have to be short syllables with Aaron included.
Yeah, that's right. Keep it simple.
You know, I would tell you this. We, because of the hands we've been dealt in the last 2 presidential cycles, have a tendency to be angry. And you can't woo people to your side with anger. With righteous indignation and anger, you can begin to persuade. But unless you have a smile on your face at the alternative, you're not actually going to draw people to your side. So I would tell you that we must always be happy warriors. And let me add this. I am a person of faith. I start seminary in 2 weeks. I believe there's a heaven and a hell. I believe there's a man who died and came back to life. And I believe he will return on the last day, and that many of us are on his team, so we shouldn't be all bent out of shape because we already know we win.
Amen.
That was,
I believe we
that was a
actually got to
great
give him like
comment.
1 1/4 point for that.
yeah, that was a great
quarter point?
No, 1 1/4.
I'm
okay.
sorry, that
Boss.
was incorrect. The correct answer was also Ebola. So
Ebola, yeah.
sorry. I don't make the rules. I just cram them down your throat.
I have a question for you now. How much did Rafi pay you to continue to be the winner?
I have no comment.
Actually, I think you overcame him. I think you're at 3.
Excellent. Okay.
3
we can
1/4?
move on now that we've established that I win at my conference.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. If anybody would like to come up and go ahead and stand, I'll let you ask a question of the guys here or myself. Do we have any questions for the day? Right over here, please. Yes.
I think you're seeing things.
So basically, the Republicans continue to be the stupid party.
I'm going to go ahead and address this question.
Yeah, let me, you know what? No, I can get this one for you, because what happens in these situations is, in many cases, the Tea Party guys have been, well, to keep it polite, pooped on by the other side for so much. No, they tend to get upset when you have national Republican senatorial guys passing money around to ultimately paint the Tea Party guys as racist. I would be a little bit upset about them as well. But here's the other thing, and this is a pet peeve of mine with these candidates. Now, hang on a second. Wait a minute. You're not going to filibuster me. The situation here is that all of you and so many people around this country say we're damn tired of Washington, D.C. and the professional politicians. But the moment an amateur guy stands up who's not as polished as these guys in Washington, a lot of people say, oh, well, we can't have this guy because he stutters a little in a sentence, or he doesn't dress in the Brooks Brothers suit. You know what? If you're going to change Washington, D.C., you've got to change the face of Washington, D.C. If you're going to change the face of Washington, you've got to change the face of the Republicans. And some people who might stick their nose up at the less polished candidate are going to have to humble themselves in a situation and say that we're willing to accept the candidate who is not as polished in order to get a different policy outcome from Washington, D.C.
And I'd also like to just interject here, because I'm actually from Colorado. And full disclosure, I actually worked on Ken Buck's campaign. I know the man personally. I know what was said about him, and I know that it's untrue. So I want you to consider for a moment that maybe the people who you're hearing from in the national media, at the NRSC, the people who actively courted Cory Gardner behind the back of the Republican Party in Colorado and behind the back of Ken Buck in Colorado, maybe they're lying. Maybe they have an ulterior motive. Maybe they're not coming with an altruistic plan to get the Senate back. Maybe they're just trying to install their own power broker. But honestly, I like Cory Gardner too. We share a last name. How could I not?
One more question right here. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I'll deal with you afterwards. We can talk, but we've got other people.
From great suffering.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. The NRSC, who's funding them now?
Who's funding the NRSC? You can go online and find them. Here's honestly, this is the biggest problem with the Republican Party, and jump in here, I don't mean to filibuster. The Republican Party, by and large, nationally, has become more and more dependent on very large donors. Because the Obama administration did a very good job of wooing small donors to them. In 2000 and 2004, Bush beat Kerry with small dollar donations. In 2008 and 2012, Obama beat the Republicans with small dollar donors. The Republicans freaked out, and they went out and they got some very large donors out there from Wall Street interests, banking interests, gambling interests, and others. And they pay a lot of attention to those individuals. Here's the inherent weakness of that. I don't want anybody to think I'm saying the Republicans shouldn't take money from certain people. What I am saying is that this has created a dynamic where they have become dependent on the large dollar donors. They've no longer made an effort to get the small dollar donors. And I'm sorry, I want to have a private plane one day. But the people who fly coast to coast on a private plane without having to go through TSA, who have houses on both coasts and can go all over the world and send money to Washington to shape the tax code and the regulatory structure, their interests and our interests and the interests of the American people, they're not really the same anymore. God bless them for thinking they're still connected to people because they have the first dollar they made framed on the wall. God bless them for it, but they're not really connected to Main Street anymore.
I just want to add, yeah.
Well, hey, we are out of time.